Hey there, boys and girls. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at Robin Mead inspired landscape watercolor paintings. And this is an example of her artwork that we see in front of us. She really utilizes line and the separation of warm and cool colors in her artwork to create these really gorgeous, whimsical mixed media pieces of artwork. And mixed media, all that means is that she is using a combination of mediums. So she is using watercolor, pens, maybe sometimes crayons, different types of medium, not just one, which is what mixed media means. Now we'll be doing the same thing in ours. We'll be using watercolor and crayon to create a crayon resist painting. Now Robin says that she loves to design colorful depictions of nature. She prefers to paint ocean landscapes. And she really tries to use her own intuition to capture joy in the bold color that she creates in front of you. So she kind of believes that that is her ultimate way of expressing how she feels onto the canvas using all of those bright, vibrant colors. So now let's take a look at what we'll be creating with our crayons and watercolor paints. Now if you don't have watercolor paint, that's actually perfect because I'm going to be teaching you how to paint with using just markers. So using washable markers, we're going to create these watercolor landscapes and using with crayons as well. So let's get into the drawing portion and then I'll show you how to color it. If you'd like to follow these steps, then you can. So now the first thing that we're going to be creating is the waves in the foreground. And what I mean by foreground is it is the closest object to you in your drawing or painting. So the closest thing to us, if you look back at the example, is the waves. So we are going to paint the waves bigger because they are closest to us and they are in the foreground. So now all I'm doing is creating these really nice swirls off of the paper, going up and around, kind of connecting to one another. Now they don't have to be perfect. I am drawing them fairly large. Yours don't have to be this big, but remember, if it is what's closest to you on the paper, then it should be probably the biggest thing in your drawing. So just keep that in mind to kind of make sure you have the correct proportions. But again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm actually going to draw two swirls here, two waves, and I'm just going to bring those up and connect those to each other. So kind of like a snail, like the snail's back, if you've ever seen like those swirly, snaily kind of shells. And so the next thing I'm going to draw is what's called a horizon line. Your horizon line is where your ocean or your land meets your sky. So now even though we are going to be drawing mountains in the background as well, we still need this horizon line to know where our ocean meets that sky or that land. So we're going to draw that straight across the paper and we're going to go behind the waves because obviously our land isn't going to go in front of our waves because our waves are closest to us. Okay, perfect. Easy peasy so far. So now I'm just going to make some really funky bumps to create the mountains. And again, not being perfect, making my traditional bumpy triangle mountains so they look, whimsical and creative, not perfect. Some of them are a little bit more curvy, some are a little bit more straight, bigger, smaller, that kind of stuff. But you guys are pros at this point. So now I'm going to add a little bit more detail to my background, and I'm going to create a sun, which is going to just be a half circle somewhere in the middle of the paper. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just drawing my representation of a sun. And to make it a little bit more colorful and unique and whimsical, I'm going to draw the rays of the sun going off of that half circle. So what I mean by rays of the sun, I'm just drawing straight lines up and out from that half circle. And I am drawing them all the way off the paper so that whoever's looking at my art piece can imagine that there's something happening beyond the paper that we just can't see. So I'm drawing everything that goes right off the paper. And adding more detail, I'm going to start adding some more bumps inside of the water. So inside of my ocean, and these are going to be extra waves later on. Right now they don't look like much because they're just bumps to us, but eventually they will look like waves once we actually paint these. And again, I'm going behind my waves in the foreground because the waves that I'm drawing currently are a little bit farther back, a little bit farther away from us. So those are going behind our foreground waves. And believe it or not, that's actually pretty much it for the drawing portion. We'll add some extra lines here and there later on for some more detail, but for now I'm going to just take a permanent marker. And please remember, if you're using a permanent marker, to either put another piece of paper behind your drawing or lean on something so that you don't mark up the paper. But I'm just going to trace over all of my lines with my permanent marker or my Sharpie. I am using a Sharpie or permanent marker because we will be using watercolor. And if you don't use a Sharpie or a permanent marker, then the marker could run or what's called bleed through the paper. So make sure you're using like a Sharpie or something like that. And as you'll notice, I'm actually going in and adding those extra lines now. So I'm adding kind of more patterns throughout the entire piece, some more zigzags, some more triangles, some more swirls. And you can add or not add these if you choose to. It's kind of completely up to you. But I just think it adds a little bit more variation to the actual piece. I also made a couple of lines a little bit thicker than other ones. So playing with pattern and line weight, meaning that you are making some lines a little bit bigger or thicker and other ones a little bit thinner. So next step, I'm going to go in and add some crayon. And again, you don't have to do this. You can actually color the entire thing in crayon if you want to. That is completely up to you. But my whole goal for this painting is to create a mixed media painting. So I am going to add just a little bit of crayon coloring and then paint the rest of it. So I'm actually going to add more patterns with my crayons. So I'm going to go in and create some extra kind of bumpy lines, so curved lines here and there. And you can again create whatever patterns you choose to create. These are just the ones that honestly I thought would look nice, so I am going to just add these here and there. I'm kind of creating my own pattern inside of my patterns already, so I'm adding extra lines here and there. And I'm going to like speed through this part because it's up to you how you'd like to add your patterns. So I'm going to speed through. You can always stop and pause the video if you're confused on the patterns that I add, but I think they're going to be pretty straightforward for you. And just keep in mind that I have to speed through some of this part because if I don't, then the videos are going to be super long. So I definitely have to speed through some of this. But again, if you need to, you can always pause and go back. So take your time with this. It looks like I'm rushing, but I'm taking my time. So I am pretty satisfied with the crayon that I added. So now let's move on to the watercolor portion. Okay, so like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, we are going to be painting with marker, and I'm putting that in quotations. I'm using air quotations right now. So in order to achieve this, we'll need a couple of things. You'll need a piece of plastic, whatever kind of plastic you can find. I'm using a plastic Ziploc baggie. You'll need some paintbrushes, some markers, and obviously a little cup of water and some napkins just in case we make a mistake or we spill or something like that. Make sure you have some napkins nearby. So I'm going to put a white piece of paper underneath my Ziploc bag or my plastic so that I can really see what colors I'm using. Just keep in mind that the white paper is behind the bag, so it's underneath it. I'm just using it to see clear. So then what I'll do is I'll take my washable markers and I'm just going to color directly onto the piece of plastic. I am not coloring on the white piece of paper, I'm coloring on the plastic. After that, I am going to take some of my water and my paintbrush. I am going to dip my paintbrush into my water, just like normal watercolors, and I'm going to swirl around on that marker. And you'll notice that it does start to come up and it does actually start to look like watercolor paint. So that's going to be the technique that we do for this painting. And I'll scoot this out of the way so you can see how I begin to paint my landscape painting right now. Please keep in mind that I'm using washable markers. The ones that I'm using I got from the dollar store. You can use Crayola markers, but please do not use permanent markers because permanent markers will not work. They're not washable, so it won't react with the water. So you do need washable markers. And I'm just going to go in, I'm going to paint just like I would with any kind of other watercolor and just start filling in my spaces that I feel like I would like to paint with my red. Please keep in mind that we are separating our warm and cool colors. So my warm colors I'm going to use for the sunrise or the sunset up at the top there. And then my cool colors I'm going to use down at the bottom. So my blues and greens are going to be towards the bottom. And that's pretty much it. So I'll show you how to get more color onto your piece of plastic right now. I'm actually going to use a little bit of yellow this time. And I'm going to color in a new section. Don't color over the area that you already did because the marker won't work on the wet plastic. So you need to either use a new area of plastic or wipe off the plastic so that it's dry. And if you wipe off the plastic so that it's dry, it'll work perfectly fine. And I do that a few times as well in my video, so you'll see that. And this is pretty much it for the entire piece. So I'm going to start fast forwarding through this so you can see the whole process. And please keep in mind that you are basically just painting like you would any typical kind of watercolor paint. So you can mix your colors, you can blend them together. You can use a little bit less to make your colors look a little bit lighter. You can mix your markers on the plastic here if you choose to. It's kind of completely up to you, but just use it as though it's regular watercolor paints.